Hello and welcome to the channel. My name is Annalisa Ely and today I am doing a half wrap up of the IndigAthon plus one other book that I read early this month so that I don't have to talk about 10 bajillion books in my monthly wrap up. These are all of the books that I have finished thus far in the month. It's the 20th when I'm filming this. I have started a large number of other books that most of them I'm about a third of the way through. One of them I'm almost done with. And I've also been rereading The Kiss Quotient and The Madness of Lord Ian Mackenzie, which are two romances featuring autistic people that I recently got my own paperback copies of. And I really like them, and they are my comfort reads in between reading all these other books that I'm actually supposed to be reading from my TBR. But I think I'm going to finish all of the books from my IndigAthon TBR, and so I'll be very impressed with myself for that because I rarely finish all of the books from a TBR. My Leading Ladies Readathon TBR was a lot more ambitious, so that's probably not going to go as well. One of the reasons I was able to read this many books from my TBR while also half reading a bunch of other books and comfort reading is that a lot of them are quite short. So I'm going to start with the only long one so that I don't run out of steam and not do it justice at the end of the video. Black Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse is 470 pages approximately, and I started it right at the beginning of the month. Read it very slowly, finished a couple other ones first because I was reading those on audiobook. This one was an ebook, and it was specifically a type that you can only, that from my library I could only read it when I had an internet connection, so I couldn't read it when I was away from the house, so that also slowed me down. But also it was very world building heavy and had lots of different perspective characters, which I was able to keep track of quite easily because they were differentiated nicely and they all had very differently spelled names. Plus that's always easier in physical book versus audiobook. And also it was made quite clear what positions they had in the story and in relation to each other. But it was still a lot of brain stuff to keep track of, so it wasn't a book that I wanted to read when I was tired. And I was tired a lot, as I tend to be. But eventually I gave myself permission to skim the parts that were flowery prose. There's a bit of flowery prose in this book, not in a like Purple Meadows type of a way, in a this is really gross and dark kind of a way, because it's a very dark book with a lot of gross stuff in it. Fair amount of body horror that you get tossed right into with the first chapter that continues off and on throughout. Some of the political machinations were ones that I understood where different people were coming from after she had shown it to me once, but she showed it a couple more times, which was, you know, good showing versus telling, but it felt a little bit repetitive. But that's going to entirely depend on the taste of the reader and whether you like to have that stuff more spelled out or not. I like to have stuff spelled out that's entertaining to me, but personally I don't find political machinations entertaining. I mostly find them annoying because they mostly, all political machinations tend to feature, I don't like people who do political machinations purely for their own power. Like people who do it to try to help other people by making new laws that like will make things better for them, sure, but there's a lot of just people wanting power for their own power's sake in this book, and I didn't particularly care to read about that. Just so you know, I'm a very good skimmer, a very practiced skimmer. I can skim things without missing the stuff that I need to know. And I definitely felt very attached to all of the characters, despite the fact that a lot of them had contradictory motivations and goals. I said in my IndigAthon TBR that I thought I would really like Ziala, who's the main character we get introduced to in chapter 2, and I did really like her. I didn't expect to like the High Priestess, who has a name that begins with an N, from the way she was introduced and how she's kind of one of these power machination people, but because of her upbringing and the fact that she was to a certain extent wanting to use her power for good, I ended up liking her quite a bit. Especially I liked her the most because of her relationship with another character whose name started with an I think. But this is a non-binary character who uses neopronouns, being Zer with an X. And there was a explanation at the beginning of the book about what those mean and like kind of it felt like warning you that that was in there. And then also somebody else who was talking about this book wanting to let people be aware of that beforehand, which to a certain extent, if you've never heard of Caesar before, I guess it would be helpful, but like you can figure it out from context really easily. And so I thought it was kind of weird when both the author and the reviewer were doing those explanations, except then I went and transferred my review to Amazon from Goodreads, and I read the top review for this book that has an average of 4.5 stars for total reviews, but the top review is a 2-star review that almost the entire thing is complaining about the use of Caesar pronouns. And I'm sure that the explanation at the beginning of the book was there before he wrote that review. Yes, this is a man writing it. So anyway, don't read the top review on Amazon if you don't want to read some really transphobic comments. Anyway, I really liked this non-binary character and their relationship with the High Priestess. It was a bit of a bodyguard best friend relationship, and I absolutely adore those. Then there is the main character we're introduced to in the first chapter, who has body horror done to him by his mother. So major trigger warning for child abuse, first by his mother and then by various guardian teachers that we get introduced to throughout the book, because this is a time traveling book where, nicely enough, we get at the beginning of every chapter a timeline laid out this long until convergence, which is a solar eclipse. And so you can tell at each chapter, this is 20 days till convergence, this is 8 years before convergence, and then we come back to the present timeline at starting from 20 days, 19 days, 18 days, with every once in a while the flashbacks to the first main character having a traumatic childhood, basically. I really like the relationship between him and Zyala, and another main character who is introduced maybe halfway through the book, who has yet another different goal in mind as far as what's going to go on in the city of Tova, which is like the epicenter of this whole country and where all the magic and stuff is going down. If you hear sounds that sound like fubba fubba fubba, that's my cats going in and out of the cat door into my room. Overall, I really liked all of these characters. I skimmed some of the political machinations part, and some of the descriptions of body horror, and sometimes Zyala would go off on a tangent just thinking thoughts to herself that didn't really have anything to do with anything, and I skimmed those too. But overall, I really liked it. The plot was very well structured. I get what Angela means of Literature Science Alliance when she talked about this book and how the ending was too fast, because I hit the final page and realized there wasn't anything more in this volume. I audibly said, ah! Because it ended so suddenly. You're just like, I guess we're waiting for the next book now. And also the final, the climax happened really fast, and usually a lot of books will like severely slow down the passage of time to describe the climax in a lot of detail. That's my cats using the cat run over my head. But this book didn't do that. And when I think back on Rebecca Roanhorse's other books that I've really liked, Trail of Lightning and Storm of Locusts, those climaxes went by pretty fast too. But those ones also didn't have nearly this amount of setup. So with this amount of setup and everything being very tense about what's going to happen, especially with the countdown to the day of the climax at the beginning of every chapter, you feel like it's going to be really huge and really detailed, but it went by really fast. So that felt a little sudden and incomplete. So hopefully the next book will begin with a more satisfactory wrap-up of that. So I highly recommend it. Just do be warned that there will be less detail to the ending than you would expect given the build-up. Now I'll go back to the order in which I read these, which the first one of the month was The Marrow Face by Cherie Dimaline. So, overview of the plot: it is a post-apocalyptic setting where we have a teenage boy main character who is Indigenous and from Canada. We're sorely messing up my audio right now. There's a cardboard box on my floor and he's just chewing it and ripping pieces of it up. This Samwise, the cat, is a little vacuum. He will eat anything you leave on the floor that can fit in his mouth. Yesterday I dropped a bit of broccoli on the floor because I was chopping it up, and like that big of a piece, and he ate that too. So neither of them are allowed in my room unsupervised because there are a lot of small things that they can access that they would like to just swallow. Anyway, everyone in the world, possibly, definitely in North America, has stopped being able to dream except Indigenous people. And so the government, specifically in Canada where this is set, has decided to reopen the schools that they put Indigenous people into early on in the colonization process, because that's a handy place to put them while they wait to have their marrow sucked out, because apparently if you take the marrow from the Indigenous people and stick it in the white people, the white people will then be able to dream again. Other ethnicities are not particularly addressed, but I would assume in this situation that the government just doesn't care about black people and people of color not being able to dream, and I would assume it being limited resources just gives the marrow to white people. But that isn't spelled out because the people we're following are all outside the government and everything the government is doing is mostly secret. We basically just know that the Indigenous people are taken to these places and never come out, and gradually figure out what's going on with that throughout the book. But it is mostly about being on the run, joining up with various other Indigenous people who are also running, and trying to stay safe and one step ahead of the people who are chasing them. Usually out in nature, staying away from towns because most of these people are not white passing. This is Sam, by the way. Yes, he doesn't like to be picked up. And I really like stories like that that are about running off through the woods. This book, the Del Toro Quest, is mainly that, getting from place to place and facing various natural hazards and monsters while being on the run from a occupying bad guy who has control of their country. And I really like those sorts of stories. The frustrating part about this one was that several times, once our main character has joined up with a group, they keep getting surprised while sleeping, and at no point do they figure maybe we should set a watch and like take turns staying up for an hour at a time. Like, I get they're exhausted, but that's why you take turns. And the fact that they did this multiple times and never learned from their mistakes, and the fact that taking watches is a thing that is in so many books about people running away, that how do you not know that this is the thing that you should be doing? And also there is a fair amount of sexism going on with the dumbass male teenagers, of which our main character is one, being really gross and possessive of the female teenagers that they are in groups with, and trying to like catch the biggest wild animal to impress them, which I don't have a problem with hunting. It's the I bring home the bacon so you should want to have sex with me thing. So that made the main character a little bit unlikable towards the end of the book. But there were a lot of times when he was a really good and self-sacrificing, caring about other people person, so it wasn't too bad. But I did like the side characters, specifically two of the female characters, a lot more than I liked him. But because they were there, present in the story a lot, I got to just enjoy them and not focus too much on the main character. Then we have There by Tommy Orange, which I told you in my TBR video was kind of confusing me. I don't think I was finished with it at the time. It got less confusing as it went on and the characters kind of met up and talked to each other about each other, that it was easier to figure out who was who. And apparently at the beginning of the book in the print version, or probably in the ebook version too, there is a character sheet of who all the different people are, which would have been so helpful to have to refer to. But no, I read the audiobook, which definitely helped me get through it, because there are elements of body horror and a lot of depressing sort of topics that are easier to get through for me when I'm listening than when I'm reading. So in some ways it worked good that it was an audiobook, but it would have been less confusing if I had read a physical copy. But it is about, I'd say, at least 6 different characters who are all going to a certain powwow for various different reasons. One of them is someone who is a recovering alcoholic and is talking about that and about a program to try to reduce the Native American youth suicide rate, which is very high if you're not aware. And I think that the commentary on that, about how it's like trying to tell people not to jump out of a burning building because they will die when they hit the concrete type situation, where when you have as bad of situations as these young people find themselves in, it's kind of hard to encourage them that everything's going to be okay or that things will get better. And then there are other people who are going there to meet up with their relatives that they haven't been able to know. Some of them are going to do a traditional dance, and we know from early on that some of them are planning to go there to rob the powwow because there are like prizes for winning some events. So they think there will be something worth stealing there. There is some body horror, which was very confusing to me, but is based on something that really happened to the author. I'm not gonna make you go through hearing me describe it. It was very gross, and there's an explanation of it in my Goodreads review because I had to look up and see what could that actually be. I felt a lot for a lot of the different characters. They were all quite different from each other, but all sympathetic. It wasn't the type of nice wrapped up ending that I like, but it went very well with the slice of life, if slice of very depressing life, path that the story took. Then the Birchbark House by Louise Erdrich was also slice of life, but much more Little House on the Prairie like, and I felt pretty smart when I came up with that comparison, but it is actually in the description of the book on Goodreads that this is like the indigenous version of Little House on the Prairie because it is in about that time frame, all about living day to day, being very surrounded by nature and at the mercy of nature's whims, and having not much treatment for diseases, and living in big family groups and depending on each other a lot, hunting, gathering, using every different part of plants and animals, cooking in really interesting ways. I really enjoyed the description of how they would prepare different foods, and it is all from the perspective of a middle grade aged girl who has a very annoying little brother with a lying problem, and how she feels being, I think, the middle child, and all the chores she really doesn't like versus the one she does. And there were also lots of stories being told by the older family members to the younger ones about different supernatural experiences they had had, as well as mythology and lore, and also just some regular life experiences. And I really like those storytelling aspects. Definitely check out trigger warnings for all of these. I was able to be fairly extensive on Goodreads, but I really like Storygraph's way of doing it because they have a long list that you like click and select from, so it like helps you think of ones that you hadn't thought of. Oh yeah, that might be triggering. So if you want to check out Storygraph, which I'll link below, and how they organize that, you might find that useful as well. And sometimes I would use that first, review it there first, and then go to Goodreads and like remember which ones I had selected from the list to put in my Goodreads reviews. But there's a lot of triggering stuff in several of these, so do check that out before reading. The last Indigenous book that I finished was A Map to the Sun by Sloane Leong. Here's some of the illustrations just so you can enjoy how pretty they are. There are 5 main characters who are all teenage girls with various different home backgrounds, none of which are particularly positive, and it's all about how they end up on a basketball team together and how that brings them together, and is both affected by and affects their home lives and how they deal with all the difficulties that they have. There are a lot of topics like sexism in sports because the boys basketball team is very much prioritized over the girls, and the male basketball coach is a horrible sexist, and there's a number of trigger warnings for this one as well. But it is mostly a slice of life type story that is just about these girls handling all their difficulties and figuring out how to rely on each other, and how doing something physical, like a team sport like that, makes them feel stronger and generally better about themselves, and about all the little things you can do for your friends that make a big difference to their mental and emotional health. The last book I finished that wasn't for the IndigAthon was Tuesdays at the Castle by Jessica DeGeorge. I really enjoyed the Dragon Slippers series by her earlier in the year, and tried to read Tuesdays at the Castle for the middle grade magic readathon, but didn't finish it in time, so I just got the audiobook for it this month and finished it that way. I really enjoyed it. I really liked the teaming up of various different ages of children plus a young adult, all working together and having different strengths, so that was really fun, and I really liked all of the characters. It is about a attempted assassination that takes away our main character, who is like 10 or 11, her parents and her oldest brother, and she and her sister and her other brother are princesses and a prince, and so it is all about what happens if you are royal and your parents die too young and they don't leave any heirs except for you, but you have all of these advisors who want power and think they can take it from you because you're just a kid, and you also have a magical castle on your side that like rearranges itself and where the rooms go, and can like close things off and make things disappear entirely, and can magically produce things that you might need. And so it's all about these 3 children and an unexpected young adult ally trying to keep power from being usurped by these royal advisors, and figuring out what's going on with the magical castle and what it wants, because it doesn't, you know, use words to communicate. And so it was really cute and entertaining, and had a lot of really sweet relationships, and so I really enjoyed that, and I'm excited to go to the next one, which is Wednesdays at Somewhere. It's a days of the week titled series, which is also very cute. So those are all the books that I've finished this month so far, which, having a positive experience with all of them is quite good, and I'm hoping that that will also be the case with the books that I'm currently reading. So overall, this might be a really good reading month. I'd love to know what your favorite book this month has been so far. What is your favorite book by an Indigenous author, or one you are very excited to read? And if you feel like leaving an emoji, how about something green? Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!